the dancer carved from bone. They say a home remembers everything. The laughter, the arguments, the long, quiet afternoons. My grandmother's house, raised on stilts over the damp Kampong Chhnang soil, remembers a dance. And every night when the sun bleeds out over the rice paddies and the air grows thick enough to drink, I can hear the steps beginning again. It started subtly, a whisper of a sound you could easily mistake for something else. The skittering of a gecko on the woven bamboo walls, maybe, or the sigh of the palm leaves in the evening breeze. I had only been in the house for a week, having left the frantic energy of Phnom Penh behind after my grandmother, my Yi, had passed. I wanted slowness. I wanted the drone of cicadas and the scent of rain on dust. I thought I had found it. The house was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits. The smooth, worn wood of the floors cool underfoot. The smell of jasmine and old incense clinging to the silk wall hangings. And the single, flickering pressure lamp she always used, which cast our shadows long and dancing against the walls. It was my inheritance. The house, the small plot of land, and the amulet she pressed into my hand on her deathbed. It was an Apsara, the celestial dancer, carved from what she told me was a piece of sun-bleached animal bone found near the old temples. It was exquisitely detailed. The delicate curve of her waist, the intricate crown on her head, the serene, knowing smile on her lips. It was a piece of art, a piece of history, a piece of her. For protection, Kiri, she had rasped, her voice thin as a thread. Always keep it close, she will watch over you. So I did. I wore it on a simple cord around my neck. In the suffocating Cambodian heat, its surface was always cool, a small anchor of calm against my sweat-slicked skin. For the first few nights, it was a comfort. It was a piece of my Yi, a guardian in this quiet, lonely place. Then came the scraping. It was always after midnight, when the village had fallen into a deep, heavy slumber. It came from directly beneath the main room, from the dark, earthy space between the ground and the floorboards. It was a soft, rhythmic sound. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause, like someone dragging a sharp stone across a wooden post. The first time I told myself it was a stray dog, a monitor lizard maybe, sharpening its claws on one of the house's stilts. Perfectly normal. I rolled over on my thin mattress, pulling the cotton blanket higher despite the heat, and forced myself to sleep. But the sound returned the next night, and the next. It was always the same rhythm, the same patient, deliberate pace. It never got faster, never got frantic. It was methodical, purposeful, and with the scraping came a smell. It wasn't the clean scent of the countryside. It was a cloying, sickly sweet aroma, like mangoes left to rot in the sun, mixed with the acrid smell of incense that had gone foul and damp. It seeped up through the cracks in the floorboards, through the gaps in the woven walls, thick and oily in the back of my throat. It was a scent of decay, of something sacred that had spoiled. I started to feel the amulet differently. It no longer felt like a comfort. Against my skin, it seemed to pulse with a faint, cold energy, and it felt heavier. Each night, a little heavier, as if the bone it was carved from was slowly regaining the weight of the life it once held. I found myself becoming afraid to look at it directly. During the day, I'd catch its reflection in the small, clouded mirror on the wall, and the Apsara's smile seemed fixed, too wide. By night, I didn't need a mirror. I could feel the change through my shirt. I knew with a certainty that chilled my blood that the dancer's serene smile had twisted. It was no longer a smile of peace. It was a silent, knowing shriek. And down below, the scraping continued its nightly work. The first few weeks were a battle against my own mind. I was a man from the city, a man who believed in logic and explanations. During the bright, unforgiving light of day, I would force myself to be rational. I'd climb down the ladder from my house and inspect the stilts, the foundation of my home. I ran my hands over the thick, weathered wood, searching for claw marks, for any sign of an animal. There was nothing. The wood was smooth, save for the usual splinters and knots. The earth beneath the house was packed down, undisturbed, save for a few chicken tracks and the tracks of my own sandals. There was no evidence of anything living or burrowing down there. I even scattered a fine layer of ash from my cooking fire around the stilts one evening, a trick I'd seen old-timers use to track animals. The next morning, the ash was pristine, untouched, yet the scraping had been louder than ever the night before. My sleep grew thin and restless. I'd lie awake for hours listening, my body rigid, my ears straining to decipher the sound. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. It started to sound less like an animal and more like a tool, a chisel on wood, a knife whittling away at a branch. It was the sound of something being made, or unmade. The cloying smell of rot and incense became my constant companion. It clung to my clothes, to my hair. I'd be at the local market, buying vegetables and fish, and I'd catch a whiff of it, thinking it was coming from a spoiled fruit stall, only to realize with a lurch in my stomach that the smell was coming from me. People started to keep a subtle distance. My nearest neighbor was an old woman the village called Yi Sathya. She had been my grandmother's closest friend. She was ancient, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her eyes dark and sharp. She would often watch me from the porch of her own stilt house, her expression a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked like fear. One afternoon, unable to bear the solitude any longer, I went over to her with a small gift of sweet rice cakes. We sat on her porch, watching the buffalo wallow in the muddy fields. "Bankiri," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "You are not sleeping well. Your eyes have dark circles like the bottom of a well." I tried to laugh it off. "Just getting used to the quiet, Yi. Phnom Penh is so noisy, you forget what real silence sounds like." She wasn't fooled. She took a slow sip of her cool green tea, her eyes never leaving my face. "There is no true silence in the countryside, child. There are only different kinds of noise. You must learn which ones belong to the day and which belong to the night, and which belong to neither." Her words hung in the humid air between us. This was my chance. I had to ask. "Yi," I started, my voice lower than I intended. "This house, my Yi's house, does it make noises at night?" Yi Sathya's posture straightened. She placed her cup down with a deliberate, soft click. She did not look at me but stared out at the horizon. "All old houses have voices. They remember the people who lived in them." "This isn't a voice," I pressed, feeling a desperation I hadn't realized was there. "It's a sound from underneath, a scraping." She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "Your grandmother, she was a very strong woman. She was a keeper of traditions. Some traditions are for celebrating life. Some are for managing death." She glanced down, and her eyes fixed on the lump under my shirt where the amulet rested. A shiver, completely unrelated to the heat, traced its way down my spine. "That is a beautiful carving," she said, though her tone held no admiration. "An Apsara is a divine messenger, a dancer for the gods. They are meant to be carved in stone, to last forever in the temples. To carve one in bone, that is a different kind of message. Bone remembers what the flesh forgets." She wouldn't say anything more. She finished her tea, thanked me for the cakes, and retreated into the shadows of her home, leaving me on her porch with 100 new questions and a fear that was beginning to solidify, to take shape in the dark corners of my mind. That night the scraping was different. It was louder, more insistent, and it was joined by something new, a soft, rhythmic thudding. It sounded like a foot, bare and hard, stamping on the packed earth beneath my floor. A single, solitary foot keeping a slow, deliberate beat. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. It was the rhythm of a dance. The cryptic words of Yi Sathya echoed in my head. A keeper of traditions, managing death. My grandmother had been a devout woman, but she was also pragmatic, rooted in the old ways, the village ways. She believed in spirits, in karma, in the power of offerings and the danger of disrespect. I, the city boy, had always found it quaint. Now I found it terrifying. I had to know more. My grandmother wasn't a writer, but she was a keeper. She kept everything. Old photographs, yellow documents, bundles of letters tied with string. I spent the next day tearing the house apart, not with the gentle reverence of a grieving grandson, but with the frantic energy of a man searching for an answer to a question he's afraid to ask. In the bottom of an old wooden chest, beneath a pile of faded silk sandpots, I found it. A small box made of dark, lacquered wood, fastened with a simple brass latch. It was locked. I didn't have a key, so I pried it open with the back of a heavy spoon, the wood splintering with a sound that felt like a sacrilege. Inside, there was no treasure, just a collection of small, handmade charcoal sketches on brittle, yellowed paper, and a single, tightly rolled scroll tied with a red thread that had faded to a dusty pink. My hands trembled as I unrolled the scroll. It was my grandmother's handwriting, spidery and thin, but still strong. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was more like a logbook, a record. The entries were sparse, dated by the lunar calendar. The moon is full. The scent is strong tonight. She is restless. The offerings of jasmine were not enough. Another entry, months later. The scraping has moved to the northern stilt. I have reinforced the blessings. I pray it holds. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a new phenomenon. This had been my grandmother's life, her secret war. She wasn't living in peace here. She was a warden, a jailer. Then I looked at the sketches. The first few were of an Apsara, beautifully rendered. The posture was graceful, the smile serene. It was the dancer on my amulet. But as I sifted through the pile, the drawings changed. The dancer's limbs became subtly longer, her joints bent at angles that were just slightly unnatural. Her serene smile stretched, pulling at the corners of her mouth. The last few drawings were the stuff of nightmares. The Apsara was skeletal, her ribs showing through her traditional dress. Her fingers were elongated into sharpened talons. Her hair, once coiled in an ornate bun, was a wild, tangled mess. And her face was a mask of silent agony, her mouth open in a scream that the charcoal couldn't capture, but my imagination could supply all too well. Beneath the final, most horrific drawing, my grandmother had written a single line. She must never be allowed to finish her dance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked down at the amulet hanging against my chest. This piece of bone wasn't for protection. It was a lock. It was a cage. And my grandmother, in her final act, had not given me a shield. She had passed on the key and the burden of being the jailer to me. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, heavy, charged with a static I hadn't noticed before. The pressure lamp on the table flickered violently, though there was no breeze. The cloying scent of spoiled mangoes and incense flooded the room, so strong it made my eyes water. And from beneath the floor, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was a heavy, expectant silence, a silence that holds its breath. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the drawings clutched in my hand, my gaze locked on the floorboards as if I could see through them. Thump! A single, loud, resonant thud from directly beneath my feet. It was not the soft stamp on the earth I had heard before. This was a hard, sharp impact. The floorboards vibrated. Thump, thump. It was a heartbeat, a slow, monstrous heartbeat shaking the foundations of the house. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I could feel it not just in my feet, but in my bones, in my teeth. The amulet against my chest grew impossibly cold, so cold it burned my skin. Then came the new sound, a soft, wet, tearing noise, the sound of something being pulled apart. It was followed by a faint, almost inaudible cracking, like twigs snapping underfoot, or like bones being set, one by one, into a new, horrifying alignment. I backed away until my shoulders hit the far wall, my eyes wide with terror. I didn't dare to make a sound. The pressure lamp flickered again, casting the room in a strobing, nightmarish light. In one of the flashes, I saw it. From the largest crack between two floorboards, a wisp of something black and oily was seeping upwards. It wasn't smoke. It moved with a purpose, coiling in the air like a serpent before dissolving. It was the physical manifestation of the smell, a visible corruption. And then I heard a voice. It was not a human voice. It was a whisper that seemed to come from inside my own head, a dry, sibilant hiss that scraped against my thoughts. So long since I have had a new audience. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The voice was already inside. I squeezed my eyes shut, a useless gesture against a horror that had already imprinted itself on my mind. The cracking sounds grew louder, closer. They were no longer coming from beneath the house. They were coming from the walls around me. The sharp, sickening snap of bamboo fibers being stretched, twisted, and broken from the inside. A shadow fell across the room. My eyes shot open. The pressure lamp had not gone out. The shadow was being cast from something blocking the moonlight from the single, open window. I forced myself to look. It was a silhouette. A tall, impossibly thin figure, its limbs jointed at all the wrong places. It was posed in the window frame, one leg bent high, one arm twisted gracefully behind its head in the classic pose of a celestial dancer. But there was no grace here. There was only a grotesque mockery. Its joints seemed to bend backwards, its spine curved to a degree that would snap a human being in half. As I watched, paralyzed by a fear so pure and absolute it felt like ice in my veins, it began to move. It unfolded itself from the window frame, not by climbing, but by flowing. Its limbs seemed to dissolve and reform as it poured itself into my home. The sound of its movement was the wet, tearing noise I had heard before, the sound of its own form being rent and reshaped with every motion. It resolved itself into a standing position in the center of the room, its back to me. It was tall, its head nearly brushing the low ceiling. I could see the sharp, angular lines of its shoulder blades, the unnatural curve of its spine. Its long, black hair, matted and tangled, cascaded down its back like a funeral shroud. It slowly, deliberately began to raise its arms. The joints cracked and popped with each agonizingly slow movement. The air grew colder. The amulet on my chest felt like a block of ice, stealing all the warmth from my body. I could feel the malevolent, ancient intelligence of the thing in the room with me. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. It was performing for me. This was the dance my grandmother had spent her life trying to prevent. Slowly, almost languidly, the figure began to turn. I wanted to scream, to run, to close my eyes, but I was utterly, completely frozen. My body was no longer my own. I could only watch as it revealed itself. The face was a horror beyond the charcoal sketches. The skin was tight and gray, stretched over a framework of bone that was subtly wrong, alien. Its eyes were two deep black pits, devoid of light or life, yet they burned with an ancient hunger. And the mouth was stretched wide in that same rictus grin from the amulet, a smile carved into its face that split the skin at the corners, revealing the dark gums and long, needle-like teeth within. It was a smile of pure, unending agony and malice. It took a single step towards me. The movement was a fluid nightmare, a dancer's step executed by a body that was broken and remade. Its bare foot, gray and long-fingered, landed on the wooden floor with a soft, final thud. The dance had begun. The creature, the Ning Apsar Chhnam, the bone dancer, moved through the small room with a horrifying, unnatural grace. Every step, every turn, every gesture was a perversion of the sacred dances depicted on the temple walls. Its arms would bend back at the elbow. Its head would loll on a neck that seemed to have no spine. The rhythmic cracking of its own bones provided a sickening percussion to its silent performance. It never took its empty eyes off me. It danced closer and closer, its body contorting into shapes that defied anatomy, that screamed of torment. The cloying smell of decay was overpowering now, a physical presence in the room that made me gag. The whisper returned to my mind, no longer words, but a wave of pure, ancient despair and hatred. It was showing me its story. The story of a dancer betrayed, murdered, and bound to the very bones that were meant to be her sacred art. The amulet at my chest was now vibrating, humming with a low, desperate energy. It was the only thing holding this creature at bay, the only thing keeping its elongated, talon-like fingers from reaching me. I understood then. My grandmother hadn't just prayed and left offerings. She had fed this prison with her own life force, her own will. And now, it was my turn. I broke free from my paralysis. Not to run, but to act. I clutched the amulet with both hands. It was so cold it felt like my skin was searing to the bone. I focused all my will, all my fear, all my desperation into it, just as I imagined my grandmother must have done, night after agonizing night. "No," I whispered, the word tearing from my raw throat. "The dance is over." The creature froze, its body twisted in a pose of impossible agony, one hand reaching for me mere inches from my face. The black pits of its eyes seemed to focus, to narrow. The silent shriek on its face seemed to intensify. For a single, terrifying moment, I felt a force pushing back against my will, an ancient and powerful consciousness that saw me as nothing more than a gnat, a brief obstacle. The pressure lamp on the table exploded, plunging the room into absolute darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the door. The creature let out a sound then for the first time. It was not a scream. It was a high, thin, keening wail, a sound of frustrated rage and eternal sorrow that ripped through the silence of the night. It dissolved, not in a flash of light, but like smoke caught in a draft. It simply unraveled, its form becoming indistinct, a column of shadow and malice that was then sucked, pulled, dragged back down through the floorboards with a final, violent whoosh of air. Silence. I stood in the darkness for how long, I don't know. Minutes, an hour. My body was trembling uncontrollably. My hands, still clutching the amulet, were numb with cold. Eventually, the first gray light of dawn began to creep into the room, illuminating the chaos. The overturned table, the shattered lamp, the scattered drawings. I had survived the night. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I hadn't won. I had merely postponed the performance. It has been 6 months since that night. I never left the village. I never went back to Phnom Penh. I can't. I am the new warden. I am the keeper of the bone dancer. The scraping under the floor has returned. It is softer now, more patient, but it is always there. A constant, faint reminder of the thing that waits beneath my feet. Some nights when the moon is dark, I hear the single, soft footstep, a rehearsal. The amulet never leaves my neck. It is a part of me now, a circle of cold that never warms. I no longer dare to look at its surface. I don't need to. I know the smile I will see. It is a promise. Yi Sathya brings me food sometimes. She doesn't speak of what she knows, and I do not ask. We just look at each other, and in her sad, ancient eyes, I see my own future. I see a long life spent in this house, growing old, growing tired. A different kind of tired. The tired that comes from holding back the darkness, one night at a time. So if you ever find yourself in an old, forgotten place, and you are offered a piece of the past, an heirloom carved from bone and memory, be careful. Some things are not meant to be preserved. Some traditions are not gifts, they are chains. And some dancers, once they begin their performance, must never, ever be allowed to take their final bow. Because their stage is our world and their audience is our soul.